Hey, what's up everyone? Chip Walters here, and today I want to talk about something I just discovered, and that is the power behind using multiple UV maps to create decals on your model. What am I talking about? Well, let's take a look at this here, and you can see if we go into our UV editing, I'm going to go ahead and show you the different maps that we have on here. We have this map, which is a decal map, and if I hit the N button, you'll see that that's 2048 by 1813. That's how big that map is. And then we have this other map from textures.com with just a piece of wood, and that's 1600 by 901. So both of those textures are used in creating this mapping for this object. Many of you know I have a product which basically is a bunch of materials that work with kit ops. When you apply one of these materials, it does something a little bit differently. Let's just add this, and I'm going to go over here and control click it and add this. And when I look at that in my shader editor, you'll see that over here we're using a generated texture coordinate, not a UV texture coordinate. And the purpose of that is so that we don't have to UV unwrap all objects. But in this particular case, we're going to use this wood material, and in order to create these decals and this texture, you're going to find that you need UV mapping. So why would I go to the trouble of doing this? Well, let me show you. So let's talk about why this is important. First, if you look at these different decals, you'll see that the actual resolution of the wood is far less than the resolution of the decal. If we were to actually embed these decals on the actual wood texture, we would find that there's no way we could get this kind of resolution. The textile density, something we'll talk about later, would not support it. So what we're able to do is by adding a second UV channel, we can actually map very high resolution decals on even a low resolution underlay map, which is what we've done here. The other thing we can do is each UV channel has its own set of properties. So in the case of this metallic blue foil, you can see that it actually goes into the box just a little bit, but it doesn't show any of the roughness or bump mapping that this other red part of the decal does. So we're able to create two different looks using different UV maps, and we're going to go over that. Also, as I mentioned, is that if you look at this decal, this is the main decal. If we go over to our UV editing and we switch to this decal, you'll see that this is the main decal, yet we're getting all kinds of other details on this. We can actually use this as one object in whole, or we can just grab parts of it. Like we'll just grab part of this end right here to create something that looks like this on the side and looks like this on the front. And we can just grab parts of that decal and put them where we want them as well. And we'll talk about that in a minute. There are another few great reasons to consider this approach, and let's talk about those now. Let's go ahead and add a decal as a separate object. So I'm going to go ahead and hit this add insert button and drag it on top of here, and I'm going to scale it and I'm going to rotate it, however I want. Once that's done, I'll position where I want it to be, and now you can see that it's actually on this object. But if I take this object and I Shift D duplicate it, I'm not duplicating this. I need to parent this to the object and then select both and duplicate if I want to do that properly. But you do notice when I duplicated it, all these other maps came with it automatically. So that's one really good reason. The other real good reason is that if you want to export to, say, Unity or some other 3D program, you'll know that FBX supports multiple UV maps, whereas OBJ doesn't. So make sure you export as FBX, click selected object and export as FBX. So this is great for exporting to games and other things like that. Okay, so let's get started and see how we do this. First, we're going to start with this cube. I've got a couple modifiers on here, basically two bevel modifiers. First, what I'm going to do before we jump all the way into the wood, I want to show you one of these plastics from the EEVEE Materials System. I'm going to use this plastic medium right here, and I'll hit the control button and hit the add insert, and here's our plastic. If we zoom in, we see we've got this very nice tileable kind of a bump map right there, and that can be adjusted here. So if we go down here, make it larger, say 10, these will get smaller, and then if we go down and make this scale smaller, like 2, it's going to get larger. So you'll see that's what we'll start with. So one thing to notice is if we go into our image you'll see that this is a tileable image. As we wrap this around the cube, it'll just automatically match up exactly on the top, bottom, and the sides. In our node group here, I can look at this image here and we'll see that we're set to box. And so that means it's going to project it all the way around on all the sides. If I set this to flat, you'll see it stretches it down on all the sides. It's correct on the top. So this is always set to box, and that's important because if we want to create this as a UV map, we're going to have to change that, and I'll show you in a second what I'm talking about. So let's go ahead and adjust this to the UV coordinates, and you can see that we're already getting this kind of a weird stretchy thing, and that's because we have this set to box. So this would be set to flat. Now we still have the weird stretchy thing, but what we'll find out is that our mapping isn't correct. So I'm going to go into, with this selected, I'll go into the UV editing and I'll select all of these and I'll just hit the U button, or I can go up here and say UV and I'll say cube projection because that's what we did before. So there's the cube projection, and if I zoom up on it, tab out of it, we'll see that that's great. One of these faces isn't correct, and that's because we have modifiers set. So let's go back into our layout and let's go ahead and tab into this and let's just move this out a little bit. So when you get ready to UV map something, it's going to be important to remove all the modifiers from it. And here we show the modifier list for this object. And now that we have scaled the object, we want to keep these bevels at the 45, so we kept the modifiers, but now we want to apply them. And so there's a couple ways to do that. One is you just hit the apply button from the top down for each modifier. So you would apply this one, then this one, or you could use this apply all button. The apply all button comes from a pretty cool plugin, which I recommend, which is called Interface Modifier Tools. So these tools are really good to use. You've got the supply all, viewport viz, which is basically allows you to show all these modifiers on or off. Delete all deletes all the modifiers. Toggle stack collapses them. So if you have them like laid out like this and you hit toggle stack, it just collapses them all. So anyway, I recommend that tool. So we're going to go ahead and hit apply all. Now we have all of these as separate sets of polygons. Okay, and now we can go back into our UV editing space, hit A. Now we will once again use the U key and say cube projection, and it brings it all down like so. Now, one of the things to notice is this bump map here is quite a bit larger than what we had originally. So I can come over here and select all of these UVs. That's one way of doing it. Or I can click over here and I'll select just one of the UVs, or I can come over here and hit A and select them all. So, and that's what I'm going to do in this case. And then I'll just hit the scale button and move them up. And as I move them up, you'll see I'm actually changing the actual scale for the UVs. So let's set it up to about like that. Now, even though these are off of our UV map, you know, we're still seeing them here. And the reason for that is that if we go back into our node editor, you'll see that we have, for this image, tab into it, we have this repeat mode turned on, and that's going to be important. We're going to talk about that a little later on. So that's how you would convert an EEVEE material here into one that's UV mapped. You'll have to hook up the UV channel, and then you'll have to go in here and tab into this node group and then change this to flat. And you can also add any other file in here if you want, whatever you want. Any tileable file will work in this case. What we've done now is we've converted this to all polygons, and now we have different polygons that are applied with our UV map. And one other thing I ought to mention is if I look at all of these polygons and go into this vertex mode and look at UV maps, you'll see that's my UV map. We're going to use this field to add another map. But first, let's go ahead and bring in that wood texture. So first, let's get rid of this material. We'll do that right here by hitting the X button and hitting new. And here's our principled shader, and here's our object. And what we can do, if we have Node Wrangler hooked up, we'll just press Control T, and that will give us a texture map going directly on there. Now we just need to load a texture map, and I'm going to go into my wood folder, and let's find the one that we want to use. And it's this one. This was downloaded. It's one of the free ones downloaded from textures.com. Open that image, and you can see that's what it looks like. Well, not quite working the way we want to. We do have this set with UV as our texture coordinate, mapping is 1, and then repeat is on. Moving into the UV editor, you'll see that this is what we have. Select all A, hit the U key, and say cube projection again, and here we have it. And what we need to do is we need to show the actual wood texture underneath it. You can see this is what we have, and as you can see, it's not a very optimized map. So here's what it looks like after the cube projection, and you'll see that the grain's kind of going the wrong way, and it's really small. If you notice, as we select everything, we'll see that a lot of these faces or polygons aren't really optimized for this. And what we want to do is we want to keep everything the same scale. So I'll hit A, and I'll scale it, so that it fits in here. It fits within the bounds of this map. Hit the G key to move it, S key to scale. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the sync mode, and I'm just select the top and the bottom. I got both of these select. I'll come over here and I'll select these, hit the R key, hold the control key down, and make sure that I am moving it 90 degrees. So now we have that set. So these all look pretty good. Now, problem that we're going to have is we have some of these faces which may not look right. So I'm going to take this one right here and this one right here, and I'll select both of these and I'll rotate them. Again, hold the control key down to constrain, and then I'll just select this one, and see, I'm going to move it down to somewhere where I know there's a lot of obvious grain, maybe here, so you can see the grain going across. And I'll do the same with this. G key to move it somewhere with grain, obvious grain, that direction. For the most part, I think we're in pretty good shape. Now that that's done, let's go back into layout and let's set up the rest of our material. So first I'll hit a Shift A, and I'm going to add a converter. And this is a color ramp, and what this is going to do, because it's black and white, it's going to actually convert this to a black and white image. And when it's converted like that, we can basically go right in here and plug it into roughness. And if we hold the control and shift key down and click here, we're going to see exactly what that's going to do. And I just happen to know that I want to invert this. So I'll go in here and say flip color ramp, and then I'll just move the black over so I get just a little bit. I just want a little bit of roughness. So now if I go back, hook this color up to here, the base color, control shift on this, now I'll have my object. And as we can see, let's turn on our lights, and you can see that it's starting, we're getting just a little bit of roughness over here, and shininess on here, which is really what we want. We don't want a lot here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to Shift A, go to Vector, Bump, add a bump map, drag that color down into the height area for this bump map, drag this over into the normal area, and you'll see right away that that's quite a rough bump map. So let's zoom up here, and I usually start with 0.1, tab 0.1 on some of these, and see how that works, and that actually looks pretty darn good. So now we have our underlying wood material. So next we want to add our decal. So let's show you how we do that. Take this texture map, and I'm going to Shift D and duplicate it, and then I'm going to load that with a alpha transparency decal image. This one comes from one of Sir Charles' packages. We've seen what that image looks like previously. So it's got a color channel and an alpha channel. So if I just hook this up to the color channel, we'll see what's going to look like. So that's what we're dealing with right there. But what we really want to do is we want to create a mixed node between these two. And one way of doing that is you click on this and you hold the control shift key and you hit the right click button and drag down. And this is another one of the Node Wrangler shortcuts. And it creates this mixed node, which is great. Let's also add an input RGB, and I'm going to stick it right here, and it is actually going to sit in place of the color channel, and I'm going to use the alpha as the factor. So let's go ahead now and let's hook this mix up to our base color, and let's make sure that our bump is coming from only our color. So I got to change that. That'll go right into the height. Okay, so there we have it. So now you can see that the alpha needs to be flipped, and so the way to do that is we'll just drag one to the other, and now we have it. So this looks pretty good. Now one thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to make sure this is not a repeat for this decal. So I'm going to go here and say clip, and so that means it won't repeat, and it's not repeating because it's just basically scaling to one to one on each side. The other thing we want to do is Shift A, input UV map, and I'm going to hook the UV to this vector. And right now we're using the default UV for this, but we're going to change that here in a second. So with this selected, we go over to UV editing, and I'm going to hit this button that says UV map, and I'm going to call this one let's just call this one decal UV. And now with this selected, it means that we're working on this set of UVs. With this, we're working on the other. So right now, it's going to be exactly the same as what we already have. What I'm going to do is go up under here. And remember, when we choose a picture here, all we're doing is we're just choosing a picture. We're not assigning this picture to any one of these UVs or anything like that. That gets done over the shader editor. We're just using this kind of as for reference, if you can think of it that way. I'm going to go back to this, and I want to look at our wood channel, and I'm going to use this tensile density plugin that I like. Let's sync up again. Click here, calculate tensile density, and it says it's 1.858. So that means that it's 1.858 pixels per centimeter for this thing, and that's okay, but it's not going to be good enough to be able to read this kind of stuff in here. So if I go into this image, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select all, and I'm going to say U, Q projection onto here, and then I'm going to say G, and I'm going to move them completely all off. Now, we don't see them off here. And the reason for that is because if you remember, back here, we don't have the UV map select correctly. So I'm going to now go to decal, and now you see they're not around. We'll go back into our UV editing, and if I just were to select one of these, let's take this one, and R to rotate, Control, we'll just drag it right there and say G and move it here, and then I'm going to basically scale it big and hit G again. Okay, and now I'm going to actually calculate the tensile density of that, and we're at 4. So we're 2 to 2.5 times larger tensile density for just that image. Now you'll notice that we're upside down. I want to put it over here, so I can just take and rotate this like that, and we're good. Hit the G button, and we're good. So we're in pretty good shape with this tensile density. So I'm going to go back into our decals, and I'm going to continue on. Now, as you can see, we have a white image, and I'm going to change that here in a little bit. But what I want to do first, I don't want anything below this area, these dots. So I'm going to hit in here, I'm going to hit Control R, and I'm going to move this around right to where I have it and select it there. And then I'll take this one and I'm going to move it down. Okay. Or I'm going to move it so that it's over here, and you can see the text is over there. I'm going to make this text black. I'm going to make this decal a lot darker so we can read it a little better. I'll go back to layout. I'll take this color, drag it down. Now it's darker. We'll go back to UV editing, and now we have this. So now I've basically got this over here and this over here. And now I'm going to take the edge, the end here, this. And what I want to do here is I'll hit 5 to be in a parallel mode, and I'm just going to select this, all of these here. We forgot to get the little polygons along these edges, so let me grab these two. And here, so now I've got everything, right? So I don't, yeah, there we have it. Let's see, got everything up here? Not quite. Okay, and there. Okay, now we have everything selected, and we say U, project from view, and then just take this G key, and we'll move it over to where we have this kind of a funky pattern going on. And I can actually shrink it, hit the S key, shrink it down a little bit if I want to get a little more creative. Here we go. Okay, so that's showing you now basically how we can break things up. I'll do one more, and that is I'll take this surface right here, and I will say U, and I can just say unwrap it, and it's going to unwrap it in a planar fashion. Or I could have done the same thing by moving it around to here and project from view. And project from view is going to give me the right orientation, which is kind of nice. And I'll take that thing and I'll scale it. And what I really want to do is make it so that the whole side shows up there. So now we have that done. Let's go back into our layout, and we can look at what we have. And we can certainly change the color, look at it, and we'll see that you can see again the texture right coming directly through the color of the decal. Now if we want to add a little bump to that, that's not going to be difficult. I'll take this bump and I'll say Shift D, and I'll duplicate it and put it here, and then I'll take the alpha channel out of here and put it in the height. And in this case I'll probably use 1 tab 1. And you can see now we've added a bump where it goes out, and if I hit this invert button there, it'll go in. And so now we've added a bump that goes in. If it's too strong, I can maybe say 0.5. There we go. That still works. Now notice how great our textures are. Even when we zoom all the way up on there, we can still read all that. So that's wonderful thing about this. So now let's go ahead and let's add some of these metallic foil textures on here. So how do we do that? Well, that's not too hard. Actually, we're going to move this out. We're going to actually, in this case, I'm going to take all of these and Shift D them over to here. I'll leave everything the same way. Go to shader, and we're going to add a glossy shader, and it's going to be right here. And again, we'll hold the Control Shift right click down on those two things. I'll give me a mix shader. And our FAQ is going to be the alpha from here. And I'll need to swap these like that. And now we're going to be good. So let's go ahead now, and I'm going to turn this off. And this is what we have. And I need to go ahead and create a new decal map. So let's go over to UV editing. I'm going to add a third one, and this is called foil UV. Okay, so now let's go ahead and select our foil. And with the foil selected, we'll go back over here and say U, Q projection, and we'll say G, move it up. And we'll go back into our layout, and we will go for the UV map here. We're going to say foil. And so we're not going to see anything because we don't have anything set up yet. So let's go ahead and add something like this N-gon thing. We'll stick that over here. So let's do that. Go back into UV editing. We'll grab this surface right here. I'm going to take that, hold it like this, and say U, project from view. There it is. And I can just have the G key and just move it. And what you're seeing is it's actually going to run over. There's really no way I can not conflict here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to select this face over here, and I am going to just use the K, the knife tool. So I'll go here, hit the K button, and use knife, and I'm going to put that right here. So I'll go hold the C key down. C goes down to here, and then over to here, and then hit return. And now I'm going to take all of these, move them off, just take this one, move it back on. Scale it up and move it in like so. And then I can actually come back over here again if I want. If I don't like what's going on, I can hit the K key again and just hit here, C, over to there, enter, 3, just select this one down here and move it off. So now we're good. In fact, we can maybe put something else in this one. Let's put these little squares in it. And if I scale it in the X direction, you'll see it put some, kind of makes them more vertical. S, Y, here we go, something like that. And then G, move it over here, something like this. Okay, so lastly, let's go over here, and on this surface here, let's go ahead and U, project from view. I'll just put the 5 over here. So I'll say scale. So there's our 5. 5 is right about there. Now, let's go back to our layout view, and let's go ahead. We're going to change the color to something like blue. We don't need this. Zoom up on here, and you can see that this is very reflective. Now if I want to, I can also grab the alpha map and drop it down into another bump map if I want, for instance, to stick out. But I think this shows basically a lot about what can be done. That project from view is a real important thing. I still am able to maintain a higher level of textile density than I normally would if I was using a single texture map to do all of this in Substance or something like that. So I hope this is helpful. I know I found it very helpful. I need to give a shout out to Ian Hubert. I'm one of his patron members, and I saw one of his tutorials where he applied a interesting decal on an object, and I started taking it apart and seeing exactly how it was done, and that's what got me to this workflow that you're seeing here. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you online.